How's it going, Eliminators? Today, I'm going to be showing you how to remove a flywheel from a push mower. It's super simple, so let's get right into it. So we have a little Craftsman push mower here. The deck is rotted out on this thing. You guys can see that it's rusted and it's already been repaired on this side here. It's completely rotted out, so the deck is no good to us. The engine as well was run with low oil, so we're not keeping the engine. Basically, we're just parting it out. And one of the steps here is that we're going to pull off the flywheel so that we can keep that. And I'll get into why you want to keep these if you are into the repair business. So on these mowers, they have what's known as a tapered crankshaft. So it gets bigger as it goes down, and that just gives the flywheel kind of like a pressure fit onto the crankshaft itself. So I'm going to be showing you guys how to remove a flywheel. Like I said, it's super simple. So the first thing we're going to do, after you've already removed your top recoil housing from the engine, you're going to come to the nut on the crankshaft right there, and we're going to remove that. Now to do that, I'm just using a 3/4 inch socket on my little rigid impact here. Now you want to remove the nut here from the crankshaft because we want to remove the recoil cup. So what happens is as you pull your recoil, there's arms that extend out and they grab these little edges here on this cup, and that allows you to turn your engine over. So we're going to remove that cup, and then we're going to take our nut here and we're going to thread this back onto the crankshaft. Now, as you probably saw in the thumbnail of the video, I'm going to be using a hammer to remove this flywheel. Now, how exactly am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to be taking this hammer and I'm going to be hitting the top of the crankshaft, and that impact will create a vibration that is usually 9 times out of 10 strong enough to break the flywheel loose from the crankshaft itself. Now, one thing that's super important here, you guys notice how the nut on the flywheel is raised and the threads are visible. If I go ahead and take the hammer and I hit that nut like that hard enough, what it will do is it will push the nut down onto the crankshaft, and not only will you ruin the threads on the nut, but you will also ruin the threads on your crankshaft. You do not want to hit the nut when it's in the raised position like that. Now, vice versa, you also do not want to hit the crankshaft with the nut removed or with the nut too low, because what will happen is the force of the hammer will do what's known as mushroom the head of this crankshaft here. So it will actually deform the head of the crankshaft, which will ruin your threads. Now, to do this properly, you want to make sure that the nut and the tip of the crankshaft are at the same spot. Basically, what we're doing here is using the nut to protect the threads of the crankshaft. Simple as that. Now you guys can see here, I'm gonna try to lift up on this flywheel. It is not moving. So it is secure onto the crankshaft there. So like I said, now that the nut is in the proper location, we are protecting the threads. I'm going to come to the top of the crankshaft here, and I'm going to give it a couple taps with the hammer. Now, as you saw, I gave it a couple taps, and unfortunately, the vibration was not enough to loosen this flywheel from the crankshaft. So what I've done is I've removed the nut, because at this point, you want to take a look at your keyway on the flywheel and the crankshaft, and you can see that the keyway and the key are not lined up. So this engine has had a sheared flywheel key, which means that it's going to be much harder to remove this just using the basic impact and vibration method. So at this point, what you can do is go ahead and get yourself a pry bar and put it under the edge of the flywheel. You could do it at the back and the front if you want, but just be very careful because this flywheel and many of them on lawnmowers are going to be aluminum, and they're only cast aluminum. They could break very easily. So what we're going to be doing is as we hit the top of the crankshaft to provide that vibrational force, we're also going to be putting a downward pressure on this pry bar here that will help lift up the flywheel as the vibration helps break it loose. So with a little bit of downward pressure on that pry bar, you're going to go ahead and hit the tip of the crankshaft with the nut flush to protect those threads. So you may have noticed at the end of that clip, the flywheel had a slight little wobble to it. That's because the impact created that vibration, which shocked the crankshaft, and that little upward pressure was enough just to pop that flywheel loose. So we can now go ahead and remove the flywheel nut there and lift off the flywheel from the lawnmower here. And you guys can see there is the keyway that is machined into the flywheel. And again, these are just cast aluminum, and we'll get to why you don't want to hit them that hard right now, because I have another flywheel here. So that's the one we just took off. And check this one out, guys. This one has a crack right from where the key is all the way out to the outside edge. So what happened on this one was my customer hit something and it ended up shearing the key, but it also ended up cracking the flywheel, and it's super unsafe to run this now. So this flywheel was pulled off of that machine, and we replaced it with another one that we pulled off of a scrap engine, just like we're doing now. So we have used a flywheel to replace this one on a customer's mower, and we are now replacing our inventory with another used flywheel that's in perfect condition. But if you're not careful and you miss on your downswing, I mean, you could possibly hit your flywheel. So you want to be centered up when you go to hit that. And again, you don't want to be prying up all that hard. There is all kinds of little stuff down here. So you have your kill switch right here, and we have our crankcase breather tube right there. So if you're just kind of going in blindly with your pry bar and you push down on it to pry up on that flywheel, you know, if it's a riding lawnmower, you could have something like a magneto system under here, and just kind of jamming a pry bar in there could damage the copper windings of your magneto. So you just want to be careful of that. We only went to the outer lip of the flywheel, and again, you're just putting a little tiny bit of force on there so that when that crankshaft gets shocked, that flywheel just wants to pop up from the tapered shaft. And like I had mentioned, the key was sheared on this one. So here is the keyway that's ground into the crankshaft, and there is half of the key, and then over here is the other half of the key. So when you hit something, let's say you hit like a tree stump, what's happening is the engine is always spinning under power, and the momentum of the blade and the crankshaft, well, it wants to keep turning, and the momentum that this flywheel here gives, that also wants to keep turning. So in order to protect your engine from being damaged when you hit something, they put these little aluminum keys inside of the keyway so that it is meant to shear, so that your engine and your crankshaft stops, but your flywheel and the momentum of that will keep spinning. So again, a lot of times, if this doesn't shear, you will bend a blade, and then you could run into all kinds of issues where you warp your crankshaft and the oil seal on the bottom side starts to get wallered out because the crankshaft is now warped, and instead of spinning nice and straight in that little circle where the oil seal is, it starts to wobble and oblong that hole. Now, if you try to remove your flywheel using the same method that I showed here and it doesn't work, there's a couple other things that you can do. On a lot of these lawnmower crankshafts, they're going to have a little recess machined into the end of the crankshaft there. If you have one, you could use an air hammer to go ahead and provide extra vibrational force to that crankshaft. I've used this to remove a lot of electric PTOs because sometimes they just seize on, and those are straight shafts, not tapered. And what'll happen is they just kind of seize on because they've never been off in such a long time. So if the end of the crankshaft has that little divot, I go, upside down, obviously, because you're going to be working under a riding lawnmower, and you just hit that with your air hammer there, and it just provides enough vibration to drop that electric PTO down because gravity is going to help pull it down. And these things work awesome. The other thing that you could do is you could go ahead and use a flywheel puller. So on a lot of these flywheels, you're going to notice that they have holes on top of them. Some of them are going to be threaded from the factory, but the majority of times you're going to find that these holes are not threaded. So worst case scenario, if you can't get your flywheel off, you could go ahead and put a tap into these holes, tap them to a certain thread, go ahead and get yourself some bolts that are long enough to use a flywheel puller, and then use the flywheel puller to help pull that flywheel off. But that's going to be it for today's video. Like I said, super simple and easy to do. With that being said, if you guys enjoyed the video, think about leaving me a thumbs up. It really helps me out. you can click here to subscribe and click here to watch one of my previous videos. I upload every single week, so be sure to stop on by next week, check the channel out for new content, and as always guys, thanks for watching.